Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today's February 20th, 2023, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So, first things first, Bakhmut, let's get to the news happening there. So, the Russians officially did take Paraskovivka. There's now a little bit of fighting ongoing outside of the city, but as I've said previously in the previous video, last Friday, is that the Russians are now pushing towards Zahidne and Berhivka, so the settlements just outside of Bakhmut on the north side, and this is where the Russians are really trying to push towards is the main highway, the last passage that the Ukrainians are using to get to Bakhmut. This is extremely bad, and I don't understand why the Ukrainian army hasn't yet done a counterattack here. It's really important. They have done a counterattack in the south, and it's a successful counteroffensive, a small counteroffensive, but it was successful in pushing out the Russians about 2 to 3 kilometers outside of the highway. But here as well, it's really, really important to do it as fast as possible. And as I've said, it's not important to push them out all the way outside of Soledar. This would be very difficult at this point, but at least pushing them out of this highway, the TO513 highway, close to Blahodatne, which runs through Praskovivka, at least taking back this territory, taking control of the higher ground here that overlooks Soledar. So they will be able to at least hold some safe routes towards Bakhmut. This is really important. So let's take a look at the map as well with more detail. And you can see here, there's three offensives that they're doing right now. They've taken control over this juncture of the MO3 highway north of Bakhmut, pushing towards Zahidne, pushing towards Berhivka, and another offensive pushing north towards a small village of Zalizyanske. So the Russians are really putting it all in on the north. This is where they're really successful. They managed to take Soledar, then Blahodatne, and now they're having a lot of success here. I really think it's imminent for the Ukrainians to do a counter attack here, push them out at least towards Blahodatne. This is at the minimum. And here there was successful little counterattacks, and there was a report as well that a Russian recon unit close to Klishivka was destroyed last night by the Ukrainian forces. So in the south, things are relatively good and under Ukrainian control, but I feel like there's a sense of lack of control in the north. And, if Ukraine wants to really hold Bakhmut, they can't just, hold the south. They also need to be able to push them out of the north. So hopefully next couple of days something's going to happen here. I really hope so. The other offensive that the Russians opened up was close to Kupiansk. It's still very unclear what's going on here, but obviously I reported that close to Dvorichna, the Russians are pushing towards the village of Dvorichna, and there's also a lot of fighting currently going on close to Liman Pershi, Vishana, Sinkivka. So these are all small villages close to Kupiansk on the north side. So the Russians are trying to get to Kupiansk. It's a very important city to take on the north side. As it is a main juncture of many roads, and I think there's a railway hub here as well. So for them, it's very important to take back Kupiansk. So we're going to focus probably the next couple of weeks as well around this front to see how successful the Russians are. And for them, honestly, it's not that difficult to open this front because of how close the Russian border with the Ukrainian one is. So for them to resupply their soldiers here is very easy. So I'll keep you guys updated as to the situation in Kupiansk. And the other front that the Russians are currently heavily pushing in is Marinka. And so they're having a little bit of success here. But yet again, this has been ongoing since 2014. You can see this was the line in 2014. And the Russians they just capture a couple blocks, every week. But it's a very difficult situation for the Ukrainian forces here due to the fact that these are some of the best soldiers that Russia has here, the best stationed soldiers, because obviously this is in Donetsk, this is the capital of the so-called DPR, so they have some of their best, most experienced soldiers here. But the Ukrainians have been holding the line here very effectively since 2014. Look at how much ground they gained in 9 years. It's ridiculous. So the situation is also difficult in Marinka, and in Vuhledar, well, it's catastrophic for the Russians. We all know how catastrophic it has been for the Russians to hold, not only go on the offensive, but now apparently the Ukrainians have done a small counterattack and pushed out the Russians close to Pavlivka. And so there's a lot of fighting actually going on on the outskirts of Pavlivka, so the Russians can't even manage to defend now here. So the situation is very dire for the Russians, thankfully, in Vuhledar. And they really counted on this offensive in Vuhledar. Let's not forget the videos, the constant flow videos of how much soldiers and how many vehicles they threw to gain Vuhledar, to push out here, because they really thought that with the breakout here, they'd be able to put a lot of pressure, not only in Donetsk, but really start pushing from the south and take eventually, a huge chunk of the south of Donbas. And here we see how much of a failure that was for the Russians. So that's pretty much it in terms of the updates on the front lines. The situation is under control. The grand majority, the Ukrainians are able to keep a very strong defense, even though this major offensive from the Russians has started. And so let's hope that in Bahamut, where it's the most difficult, the Ukrainians are going to be able to really mount a successful counterattack to push out the Russians. At least for me, it will be important to push them back towards this line here. If they're able to really push out the Russians behind here towards Soledar, this is already going to be great news. So I don't know. We'll see. Now, I want to get back to my two other slides, because the biggest news of it all is that Biden came to Kyiv for a visit with Zelensky. So this is huge. It's a massive PR win for Ukraine. And, well, besides the military assistance that was pledged just a few minutes ago from Biden, which amounts to about $460 million, which includes ammunition for the HIMARS systems, 155 millimeter shells and 120 millimeter shells, it's also an important show of strength, not only for the United States, but for Ukraine. This means that the United States is committed at supporting Ukraine even further. They're doubling down. The second thing is that obviously it's recognition and legitimacy of Ukraine's sovereignty by the most powerful democratic country in the world, the United States. And it's a huge propaganda blow for Moscow, considering that they were supposed to take Kyiv in less than a week. And now, a year later, and you have Biden strolling in the center of Kyiv with Zelensky, talking about how resilient the Ukrainian people are and how they're able to defend themselves against the second best army in the world. So it's a huge win. It's an important show of strength. And apparently, a lot of people are asking questions as to how he was able to do this visit. And there's some sources saying that this was also communicated with the Kremlin to avoid conflicts if they were to shell or do a missile strike today, and Biden would have been present in Kyiv. So there was also sirens that were heard in Kyiv as Biden was walking with Zelensky, but that's just because the Russians scrambled jets perhaps as a pity, show of force from their side. But overall, this is a huge win, and you can see that the United States is continuing their support to arm Ukraine and to win this battle against Russia. It's really important because this sends out a message to the entire world and the democratic world that we stand by countries that are willing to defend themselves for democratic values. And following up with the visit from Biden to Kyiv, tomorrow also marks a very important date, because last year, if you guys don't remember, was the famous February 21st speech from Putin, where he, for about an hour, was just mumbling and talking a bunch of BS facts about how modern Ukraine was created by Russia, and that there's neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and Russia needs to liberate Ukraine from these neo-Nazis and extremists and oligarchs. But now, tomorrow also will mark another speech that Putin will do. And it'll be interesting to see what Putin will say. I usually don't really care about what Putin does or what he says in his speeches, because it's always usually the same narrative. But now it's 1 year in, and the Russian government has not been able to pull off any type of, major victory or showcase a victory for the Russian people. You can say that perhaps Mariupol for them is a huge victory, and the fact that they've managed to create a land corridor, but there's no real sense that they took Ukraine under control. And so I'm interested in seeing what Putin's going to be saying tomorrow in this, State of the Nation address. And you guys let me know what you think Putin's going to say tomorrow. I think it's going to be obviously a speech about how this is not a war against Ukraine anymore. It's not a special military operation against Ukraine, but they're fighting now NATO, and that the stakes are much higher for the Russian people. Their sovereignty, Russia's future is at stake, and that the Russian people need to wake up and go fight for the Tsar. I think that's what he's going to be saying. I exaggerated, obviously, the part about the Tsar, but you get what my point is, that, this whole thing about the Great Patriotic War will be brought up as well, right? In World War II, we've all fought together against a common evil, and yet again, we face the same evil from the West, who wants to take everything away from us. And now we need to rise against this evil and fight until the end to win, because that's what Russia's always done. It's win great wars. I think that's what he's going to say. And perhaps even, and here I'm putting a question mark because I'm not sure, and I don't really think that Putin's going to say it, but it's potential, it's perhaps maybe going to happen, calling it officially a war, right? For last year, he's been saying that everybody needs to call it a special military operation. But perhaps Putin now will officially declare that this is a war against Ukraine. I don't think he's going to say that this is a war against NATO or the West, but perhaps against Ukraine, and that Ukraine is fully under control by NATO, by the United States. Look how Biden visited Ukraine. The Khazain, the owner of Ukraine, came to tell the Lord of Ukraine came to tell them what to do and how things should be done. So I think he's really going to put emphasis on that. So it's going to be very interesting in regards to the speech tomorrow that Putin's going to have. And let me know, guys, what do you think Putin's going to say tomorrow? I'm very interested in hearing your feedback from that. So that's it, guys. It's a really quick update. I just wanted to talk about this surprise visit from Biden. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.